Hello and welcome. I'm Ali. I'm an all-round lover of brains and their amazing capabilities. As a clinical solution-focused hypnotherapist and mental health educator, I'm here to support you to thrive and cope brilliantly with whatever life has in store for you. As a positive psychotherapist, I work on the principle that in every job that must be done, there is an element of fun. So you could say, I'm the Mary Poppins of mental health. Have you ever wondered how your brain worked or why you do some of the things that you do, or when you struggle sometimes? This video is a really quick introduction, a few million years of evolution and an insight into how you and your brain works. But first, a disclaimer. I'm neither neuroscientist nor medical doctor, so you must not take anything I say as medical advice. I mean, I know you wouldn't, but better safe than sorry. As I would say to my clients, if you're taking any medication or are worried about physical symptoms that you have and can't explain, please seek the advice of your GP or pharmacist. Great, let's crack on. So, let me introduce you to my friend. My little friend is going to help me illustrate where in the brain we are at any time. So, let's take the lid off. There you are. Don't need that anymore, do we? We're just going to talk about brains. And we're going to use the bit that doesn't come apart. So let's start with the last bit of us to involve, so the intellectual brain. So if you want to think about where it is, this part is in the front, this part in the back, okay? So I'm talking about the part here, the intellectual brain. This is the part here, and it's the part that kind of sits at the front of the skull. It's kind of going to the outside as well. But the part that we're interested in right this second is the prefrontal cortex. It's your conscious part, it's the part that you know as you, and it is the part that interacts with the world. It is attached to this vast intellectual resource, which we kind of just casually refer to as the intellectual mind, because it's the part of the mind that we don't share with other animals. And this part actually looks very similar to those found in humans up to 200,000 years ago. That was the last time we had a real upgrade. So it stores all of the experiences we've ever had, all of the knowledge, the skills that are created because of those experiences. It's like a vast library that we have access to. And it enables us to be creative, inventive, to make decisions, to come up with solutions to whatever challenges and opportunities come our way. It will always come up with answers based on a proper assessment of the situation, and it's generally very positive. However, there is another part of the brain. Now, this original primitive part of the brain that we do share with other animals. Now, when I go to point that out, it's actually really tiny. It's really difficult because there are lots of important parts that are really powerful, but they are very small and they sit just on top of the brain stem here. So the central and influential part of this is the amygdala, so called because it's the shape of an almond. There are several bits of it, but we can even just in here see it's so tiny that you can only see one tiny little bit. The amygdala is generally referred to as the fight, flight, freeze area of the brain. And it's associated with two very other primitive parts. So somewhere in here is the hippocampus, which holds all of our behavioural responses, both appropriate and inappropriate. And there's also the hypothalamus here, just underneath the thalamus, which regulates all of our chemical responses, including the release of cortisol and adrenaline, but also our feel-good hormones too. So these three parts of the primitive brain, they work together to ensure our survival, but only our survival. It doesn't really care if we're happy or thriving. And so it goes, well, if you're breathing, it gives itself a pat on the back for a job well done. Now, to get an idea of how the two parts of the brain manifest themselves, let's start with the primitive brain. So, I just want you to imagine something for me. Imagine that you go out for a walk after watching this, somewhere that you know really well, and you run into a polar bear. Well, what would happen? Now, unless you're watching this from Svalbard or somewhere like that, the chances are you wouldn't go, that's a bit peculiar. I wonder what that big polar bear is doing here. What would in fact happen is something like this. Heartbeat races, go sweaty, rapid breath, stomach churning, and you would be off like a shot. Now, from a physiological perspective, you'd lose intellectual control because you move from your intellectual to your primitive brain. Now the primitive brain then triggers the fight-flight response in the amygdala. The hippocampus would run through all of the patterns that have enabled us to survive over the millennia and stored ancestrally. And who knows, but your instinct somewhere in the back of your brain might be to run. The hypothalamus then releases cortisol to increase the heart rate and blood flow. It tenses the muscles to get you ready to run away because it needs you to survive to live another day. It is an amazing process and it happens in the fraction of a second. Now in those circumstances it would be appropriate because it enables you to do what's necessary to remove yourself from imminent danger. We don't need to think about our brain going to do this. It does it by itself and it will always do its job. So the trouble is, our brain doesn't know the difference between real or imagination. And many of the perceived polar bears in our lives aren't physical threats at all. They're the everyday concerns that all of us have. This response increases the cortisol level in our systems by up to 500%. And this cortisol takes 2 to 3 days sometimes to leave our system. It depletes our serotonin, which is an essential coping hormone that we often feel as well-being and happiness. It fogs our brain, which makes it difficult to access our resources in our prefrontal cortex. And so suddenly it becomes hard to remember names or where we put our keys or how we do our job normally. It has an impact on our digestive system because digesting food takes a lot of energy and blood flow, and you need that elsewhere in your body, which is why we get those knots in our stomach when we get stressed. Whilst this is an entirely normal response, it's not always helpful or appropriate because what we're really worrying about is not a polar bear, it's a work meeting or something that happened at home, or often something that even hasn't happened yet. But our brain reacts as if it's happening now. So it gives us those symptoms of anxiety, the increased heart rate, sweatiness, breathless, stomach churning. It isn't very useful, but it does this to keep us safe. Unfortunately, the primitive brain really doesn't understand the modern world, so it mistakes those stresses of everyday life for very dangerous situations and it reacts accordingly. Now, contrast that to the intellectual brain. Our intellectual human part of the brain that we don't share with other animals operates in a much different way. Yes, it is concerned with our survival, but it is looking at that from a more positive perspective. Survival isn't quite good enough for that. It's also looking for efficiency and progression. The prefrontal cortex, part of the intellectual brain, excels in goal setting. So that's what we're going to be looking at here. So that prefrontal cortex excels in goal setting. It imagines or visualizes it very creatively, the outcomes that we want. Neuroscientist John Ratey talked of a metaphor of the different aspects of the brain, and he refers to the prefrontal cortex as the boss. Remember, this is the part of the brain that you know as you. And so it's a good thing to know that you are actually the boss in this. But like every good boss, you need a good team behind you. So once we've decided what we want, we then use the rest of the intellectual brain to do the often complex problem solving skills needed to achieve it. We don't have complex problem solving skills here. We're very good at the what, but we're not so good at the how. That comes from this part of the brain, where our skills, attributes gained from a lifetime of learning and experience are stored here. It's also the part of the brain that understands how to prioritize. It uses linear time frames and it's agile in problem solving to stay on course. Think of it as research and development, part of the business, and maybe the engineering departments too. It's our problem solver. It's greatly concerned with how we achieve things, but it does need input from the boss to tell it what to do. There is one more important part of the brain. It's the anterior cingulate cortex, or gyrus. Neuroscientist John Ratey refers to this part of the brain as the secretary. Now, like every good assistant, it actually knows us better than we know ourselves, even our peculiar likes and dislikes, and our strengths and weaknesses. And it is concerned and connected with communicating to other areas of the brain to help us achieve what we want. When the boss tells the secretary what it wants, it is the secretary that communicates this desire and works with the different parts of the brain to actually make it happen. Together, these three parts of the brain help us manage our days, achieve our goals, and live our best life. So, if you found this helpful, do give it a like. If you'd like to know more about how you and your brain work and how to get the best out of your brain, remember to subscribe. And in the comments, just let me know anything else you'd like to know about how you and your brain works.